During the long 20th century, the spotlight is often pointed towards the main powers of the world stage. However, smaller countries were affected just as much as the global superpowers. And as early as the 16th century, the Dominican Republic was being colonized by both the French and the Spanish. Christopher Columbus landed on the island of Hispaniola in 1492. A few centuries later, French influence over the western third of Hispaniola increased, while the Spanish held a heavier presence in the eastern half. This division led the Dominican Republic to declare independence from Haiti, as European influence also waned. This didn't last as long as some of the locals hoped for. In 1861, the island voluntarily rejoined the Spanish Empire. Then in 1865, after a brief civil war, the island declared independence for the final time. Over the next few decades, the United States recognized the country in 1866 and established diplomatic relations in 1884. Then, in 1904, an American legation was established in Santo Domingo. During this time, a legacy of non-representative rule occurred in the Dominican Republic. Back in the more colonized Europe, things began to escalate. On June 28, 1914, Austria-Hungary's military officer, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, was visiting Bosnia when a Serbian extremist group accidentally walked up on Ferdinand and shot him. The shot fired by the extremist group is considered by most historians as the start of World War I. Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia. Russia and France were quick to side with Serbia, while Germany was allied with Austria-Hungary. When Germany marched into the neutral country of Belgium, Great Britain also declared war on Germany. And just like that, total war begun. Intense fighting raged on the eastern and western fronts of the First World War. However, let's not forget about other parts of the world during this time. The Dominican Republic was dealing with an internal crisis when the U.S., afraid of German use of the country as a base, began militarily occupying and administering the Dominican Republic in 1916. After 3 years of brutal total war, the Treaty of Versailles was signed on June 28, 1919, which was meant to prevent another war on this scale from ever happening again. In 1924, Dominicans sick of American occupation pushed for the arrival of a certain Francisco Peinado to here in Washington, where they signed the Peinado-Hughes Agreement, which established the withdrawal of U.S. troops by September of 1924. Much to the local Dominicans' relief, U.S. troops and officials left the island completely by September 18, 1924. Then, world events took a dramatic turn. Here in New York, stocks crashed as the world entered the Great Depression, affecting businesses, agriculture, industries, etc. Unemployment also increased around the world. This economic disaster paved the way for famous dictators like Hitler and Mussolini to rise to power. It was no different in the Dominican Republic. A revolution took place in 1930, allowing civilians, initially shocked by the crashing economy, to act. Under Rafael Trujillo, a new dictatorship began to form, which would last for many decades to come. The dictatorship of Trujillo was one of the longest, cruelest, and most absolute in modern times. Trujillo maintained complete control of the military, appointed family members to key offices, strictly enforced censorship and conformity laws, and ordered the murder of political opponents and the massacre of thousands of Haitian immigrants. Trujillo also dominated the church hierarchy, educational system, entertainment industry, and virtually every other element of Dominican society. Back in Europe and Asia, things began to quickly escalate. Japan invaded mainland China in 1937 in order to gain more resources and expand their sphere of influence. Hitler and Stalin made an alliance to invade Poland together, and on September 1st, 1939, Hitler's forces invaded Poland, and World War II began. As soon as Hitler invaded Poland, Britain and France declared war on Germany and the Nazis. After a brief period of quiet known as the Phony War, Hitler charged into Belgium and the Netherlands. Within weeks, France fell. The Nazi regime's core belief were that Jews were to blame for World War I, and they were responsible for dishonoring the nation. During World War II, millions of Jews were targeted, punished, and killed in concentration camps, ghettos, and death marches. The Dominican Republic was one of the only countries in the world to have a completely open policy on accepting Jews as immigrants. Unfortunately, only a very small number of Jews made it to the island safely. Trujillo would remain in power until 1961 when he was assassinated as his popularity shrunk. Many of his followers and heirs tried to regain control, but failed trying to do so. Trujillo's death would mark a turning point in Dominican Republic history, and although violent and troubling times were to follow, the government's general direction began to change. Centrist and leftist politicians pushed for anti-Trujillo governments, while rightist politicians wanted to continue with the old regime. Eventually, a democratic elected government and leader was set up in the country. The leader's name was Juan Bosch, and things didn't really go well for this government. In just 2 years, the democratic system collapsed. Juan Bosch was thought to be a secret communist, and fear of a backyard communist state was enough for U.S. involvement in Bosch's downfall. A junta of right-wing officers overthrew Bosch. Then, just 2 years later, a three-man junta, Dominican officers who mutinied, and U.S. support was enough to install a provisional military government in the Dominican Republic. What followed was total civil war. President Lyndon B. Johnson ordered an invading force of 20,000 to the island on April 28, 1965. Over 6,000 Dominican casualties, along with 350 U.S. casualties, ensued. In the end, one of Trujillo's protégés, named Joaquin Balaguer, took office and began the Los 12 Años era. Balaguer focused on cautious rebuilding, and his conservative rule proved useful in the power of business, commercial, and industry oligarchy. The Dominican Republic's history is not well known by many, but its long and complicated history makes it an interesting place and island to talk about. And as we are entering the 21st century, the country's history continues to grow at a fascinating rate.